Want to work at DreamWorks. It was a dream job. A chance to work on some of the biggest productions, animated features that would be there. And if you were an animator at DreamWorks, you wanted to get put on one of the big projects. For example, one of their upcoming movies, The Prince of Egypt. It was expected to be a major production, a major movie that would come out. But if you didn't keep up, if you made a mistake, if you got behind in your deadline, there was a problem. And there was a chance that you could be sent to the hole. They called it the Gulag. It was getting kicked off one of the major productions and sent to one of the smaller ones. The animators called it getting Shrek'd, because they were forced to work on a movie that had been put in production but had been delayed because the major actor that was starring or was going to voice it died, and another actor took over, and it was behind schedule and no one thought anything of it. And so if you failed, you got sent to the hole, you got Shrek'd. But you may recognize the name, because the movie that you would be forced to work on would actually become a massive success. It would win Best Picture for animated feature, and it would spawn a multi-million-dollar franchise. You see, you got kicked off of Prince of Egypt, a movie that never really went anywhere, to work on Shrek, one that became synonymous with the company. You see, sometimes what we think is the worst thing to happen to us isn't. What we think is failure isn't. What we think may be the worst may not be. This morning in our scripture reading, we read about the fate of young Joseph. Joseph, whose brothers hated him so much that they were willing to kill him. And if it wasn't for the intervention of the eldest brother Reuben, that's exactly what they would have done. But instead, they throw him into the hole, into the pit, because, well, they couldn't even look at him. In Genesis chapter 37 and verses 23 and 28, it says, "It came about when Joseph reached his brothers, they stripped him of his tunic, the multicolored tunic that was on him. They took him and they threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty and was without any water." When Joseph gets stripped and thrown into the hole, he probably thought that was the worst place he could be. But he was wrong. You see, that wasn't the worst place he could be. Because just a few moments later, in verse 25 of Genesis 37, there would be a caravan that would be approaching. And in this caravan would be the Ishmaelites, who were traders. And they were coming up, taking their goods, their high-end goods, to Egypt. And Judah looks and says, well, we're not going to be able to kill him. We couldn't do that to our own brother, but you know what we could do? We could sell him. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. We can be rid of him. We can't kill him, he's our own brother, but we could make sure we never have to deal with him again. So they pull him out of the pit, and they sell him into slavery. And Joseph goes from being the favorite son to a slave. Could you imagine what a life change that would have been for Joseph? I mean, Joseph was the favorite son, right? I mean, we read that earlier in the text in Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 and 4. It tells us flat out that Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons. He was the son of his old age. And he just didn't love him more, he showed it. He bought him this high-end, high tunic. This multicolored, very colored tunic that would have been expensive to make. It would have shown the family that he was the favorite. And verse 4 tells us his brothers saw that his father loved him more than all of his other brothers, and they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. Now, you may have a favorite kid, but you're not supposed to tell them that, right? You know, I don't tell my kids, I don't tell them who their favorite is, because they'd get mad, because it wouldn't be one of them too. You know, you just don't say that. But here, Israel sure did. And because of that, Joseph lives a very privileged and clueless life. His brothers can't even stand to look at him. They can't even stand to be in the room with him. And now, They've sold him to a slave. So that's at least better than the pit, right? Well, seemingly so. It tells us in verse 36 that they sell him to Potiphar, who was the chief of security for Pharaoh. So he's at least going to a person of privilege and means. And when he gets there, chapter 39 and verse 2 and 4 tells us that the Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. I mean, Joseph here is in a good place and he rises to the top. Potiphar sees that Joseph is good at what he does. He puts him in charge of his household. And for a moment, everything seems okay. Now, he's not the favorite child anymore, but I guess he is the favorite slave. He gets to run the house. He gets to be in charge. Everything seems to be going well. But then once again, it all comes crumbling down. And it becomes crumbling down because of Potiphar's wife. Because she took an inappropriate interest in Joseph. Because she wanted to have him for her own. And she goes to Joseph and she says, "Come and sleep with me." Joseph refuses. But I think it's very important to note why Joseph refuses. In Genesis chapter 39 and verses 9 through 10, he says, "There's no one greater in this house than I, and he has held nothing from me except you because you are his wife. Then how could I do this great evil and sin against God?" You see, Joseph, when he's presented with this woman who wants him, he could have done it. He could have given in to the lust. He could have said, well, it'll just be easier to do, but he chose not to. But I want you to notice here why he chose not to. It wasn't because he thought, well, we might get caught. Right? And it wasn't because he said, he wasn't just because he thought, well, it may come back and haunt me, right? A lot of times people will only do the right thing because they're worried about their reputation or they're worried about the consequences of it, right? And so they'll do the right thing, but not necessarily for the rightest of reasons, right? But that's not Joseph here. Joseph here says, I can't do that because it would be a sin against my God. He could have gotten away with it. It wouldn't have hurt his reputation. In fact, it would have made his life probably easier. But Joseph says it's wrong. So I can't do it. But here's the ironic part. He does the right thing, and he still gets wronged. Because now this woman is spurned. And as day to day she keeps going back and Joseph keeps turning her away, she finally catches him in a situation where if he doesn't do what she says, she'll get him in trouble. And so in chapter 39 and verses 14 and 15, she does just that. She catches him when no one's around. And he flees and leaves his coat behind. And she turns it back onto him and says, "See, this Hebrew, he has come to make sport of us. And he came into me to lie with me, and I screamed. When I raised my voice, he left his garment beside me, fled, and went outside." She flat out lies. She makes up a story to make Joseph look as bad as possible, and everybody believes it, even his master. Verse 19, it says, "When the master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, 'This is what your slave did to me,' his anger burned." See, Joseph is reminded that he is not a part of this household. He's still a slave. He's still in the hole. And all it takes is a well-placed lie, and now he's gone from his place of position, and he's back in jail. He's in the gulag. He's been sent away. And then we hear the story, same song, different verse. He goes to the prison. What happens? He rises to the top. So much so that the head of the prison says, I can just kind of leave Joseph in charge and not have to worry about it. Joseph has this kindness. He becomes a favorite. He does whatever it needs to be done. But once again, it comes crashing down. There he meets a couple of people who are also in prison, who claim that they shouldn't be there. And Joseph, they have a dream and they want to know what it means. And Joseph has been given this ability to understand these dreams, and he interprets them for him. And one of those men will be put back to his position. One of those men will get out of that situation, and all Joseph asks him is, just remember me. Don't leave me in the hole. What does he do? In verse 23, he does not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Back in the hole. This has to be worse than the pit. But that's not what I meant when I said that wasn't the worst place for Joseph, the worst thing for Joseph. Because all these setbacks, all these bad days are leading him from that pit to the palace. Not necessarily a straight line, one with a lot of dips and curves. But yet in all of it, God has a purpose and God has a plan. Because one day, Pharaoh is going to be upset because he has a dream and he knows it's a bad thing and he's got to figure out what it means. And that cupbearer finally says, oh yeah, Joseph could do that. And he brings him back. And he brings him to Pharaoh. In Genesis chapter 41 and verses 39 and 41, Pharaoh sees that Joseph is something special. That Joseph has abilities and skills, and he pulls him out of that dungeon. And he says to him, there's no one as discerning and wise as you. So I'm going to put you over my house. I'm going to put you over my people. I'm going to use your skill set to help me avoid this prophecy that's coming. These years of famine that are coming to my people. And Joseph finds himself in a much, much better place. Years later, Joseph not only would save the Egyptians, but he would save his own people. Because when that famine comes, that's so bad it spreads across the entire world, his own family has to come to him for him to save them. And God's people are brought forth into Egypt and brought forth into safety because of what Joseph went through. After his father dies, his brothers are terrified that Joseph's going to seek revenge on him because they know they did him wrong. They know they made his life terrible. But Joseph tells them in Genesis chapter 15 and verses 19 and 20, do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? But as for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. You see, because what we may think is the worst thing that has happened to us may not just be that. The hole that we get thrown into, it may not be what we think it is. Because there are times when we get thrown into the pit. Times when it all falls apart. We get railroaded. Good deeds are forgotten. Or maybe even worse, they're punished. When we're forsaken by brothers, when we're forgotten by friends. And when we're in those situations, it's hard to look up and see the sky when we're in the pit. But there is hope. We've spent this last month trying to go to a brighter future. But it's often hard for us to see that to go to a brighter future when we can't even see it. When everything seems wrong. When everything's falling apart. When all we see is setback and destruction and failure. When we try to do what's right and it seems to get us nowhere. But we need to remember what Joseph understood. What may be wrong, what may be evil intended against us, God can use for good. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, it says, we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. Now, This passage is easy enough to read when things are good, right? But when you're in that hole, when you feel forsaken, when everything's falling apart, your temptation is to say, how can this be good? How can this diagnosis be good? How can this setback be good? How can these money problems be good? How can this loved one that I'm separated from, how can that be good? And it's not. But it doesn't mean it can't become good. We might think, what good could this be? But maybe because we're not thinking about it a little farther out. And what may seem the worst thing can actually be helping us to something greater. James says it this way in James chapter 1 and verses 2 through 4. Consider it joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Consider it joy when you undergo various trials. Consider it joy when your brothers throw you into a pit ready to kill you. Consider it joy when you're sold as a slave. Consider it joy when a wicked person speaks evil about you, and even though you did the right thing for the right reasons, you're punished for it. Consider it joy when you help out people and they just forget you and leave you behind. Consider it joy when you're separated from your home and your family and everyone you knew, working in a foreign land. Consider it joy. Why? Because what it produces. The testing of your faith produces endurance. That endurance brings us to maturity, makes us complete. See, when we look at the life of Joseph, we can see someone who has been through the worst and yet has made something out of it. That what was intended for evil could be turned into good. What lessons can we learn from Joseph? Well, I think first and foremost, we need to notice something about Joseph himself. In the story, every time Joseph gets kicked down, he comes back up, right? He rises to the top. Because whatever he is, he does his best. Do you notice that? Whether it's in Potiphar's house or in the prison or in the palace, Joseph goes to the top. He does his best. And I think that's an important understanding of what we need to do and when we find ourselves struggling. That you don't give up. You don't give in. Because that's the tendency, isn't it? When things aren't going our way, when things aren't working out, we say to ourselves, why try? Why bother? Why even do what's right? Yeah, I've seen that in my own life sometimes. Times when it gets to you, when the criticism's high, when the problems are great, there's this mindset that says, well, there's nothing I can do. Just mail it in. Just don't even try. But I've found that it's in those hardest times that you can do your best work. That you can make the greatest difference. Do your best, no matter whatever else is happening. Because you don't let evil overcome good. Joseph could have said, my brothers did evil to me, and it's their fault. And I can go and live however I want to now because I can blame it on them. Give them an excuse. But if we do that, then we let evil overcome. If we allow the setbacks to destroy us, we never reach to something greater. Romans chapter 12, verse 1, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. You see, oftentimes when people mistreat us, when they say things against us, when they tear us down, it is easy to sit there and say, well, I can do that then. They've already started it, right? They've begun this. But we can't allow evil to overcome. God's working for the good. So should we. Don't allow the setbacks and the failure to define you. but rather overcome evil with good. Joseph did that by looking bigger. Notice remember what he said to his brothers? You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. Why? To save the lives of many people. Because Joseph would look at his life and he would say, you know what? It was hard for me. That was a terrible place to be. I suffered because of it. But in the end, he would say, but what I was able to do because of it saved the lives not only of me and my family, but the entire world. The entire nation of Egypt would have been destroyed except for Joseph. All those people who would have starved to death survived because of Joseph. And Joseph saw that bigger picture, something greater, something more. And I don't think Joseph would have been able to do this if he hadn't gone through what he had gone through. You look at young Joseph and you look at old Joseph and you see a profound difference, right? Young Joseph was very clueless, right? He has these dreams and the first thing he does is run to his brothers and said, oh, I had this dream that made me look great. It made you look bad. He wonders why he had the relationship he had with his brothers, right? They were already against him because of what their father was done. And that made it even worse. What do they say when they see him? Here comes that dreamer. Younger Joseph was a lot more naive. But older Joseph was more seasoned. He was tougher. Older Joseph had a different perspective, and that only became because of what he went through. He was less self-focused. And that allowed him what? To do something far greater for far more people. He looked bigger. You see, every one of us are going to find ourselves in the hole. When we messed up, we got kicked down. And it's easy just to sit there and say, well, this is it. There's nothing good. Or we can look up and see something brighter. That even in the worst, sometimes it can become the best. That even in the struggle and the pain and the misery, something better can come. Because let's be honest, the good God requires good people sometimes to suffer at godless men's hands in order to bring about the greater good. Because that's exactly what he did for us through his Son. Acts chapter 2 and verse 23 and 24 says, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and the foreknowledge of God, you nailed to the cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. But God raised him up again and put an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. It was the predetermined plan of God. What Jesus had to suffer, what he had to go through was not easy, it was not good, but it was for the good. And it was God's plan. You know, sometimes we don't always understand what God is doing, but we need to understand God is doing something. And that if we hold to him, we continue to do our best, we trust in what he's doing, we overcome evil with good, we'll see God has something greater in store. That doesn't mean that the evil world won't do evil. This good man was put on a cross by the hands of godless men. But it wasn't just the godless men who crucified him, but the godless men who sinned, who caused him to be crucified. You see, sometimes it's our own evil that causes the harm in the world. Our own selfishness, our own ego, our own wicked action. Joseph's brothers did wrong. And because of that wrong, they harmed someone. Because of the harm that we've done, we've harmed someone as well. We've harmed our God. We've harmed his Son. It's only because of the sacrifice that he made that we have a hope. Because God raised him from the dead and brought an end to the agony of death. Death was an enemy that had never been defeated. Many had tried, but everyone had failed. until Jesus came and gave us the hope of the resurrection, the hope of a future, the hope of something greater, bigger for the whole world. The hope that comes by his death and through the power of his life. You see, we have benefited from the agony of another to bring us hope. And sometimes it's our own agony and our own suffering that helps bring hope to others. We may find ourselves in the hole, but it may not be the worst thing for us if it brings us closer to God, if it refocuses us on what truly matters, if it helps us to see that the hope isn't always here, but in eternity. You see, it's through the suffering of Christ that we have a hope of eternal. And it's through our own suffering here that makes us long for and see the bigger picture. That what here isn't the end. And it helps us to see what we need to do in order to find that hope. Because there is hope only found in Jesus Christ. And today I ask you, have you been born again? Have you been raised up? Have you been changed? See, all of us have to go down in the hole. All of us die to sin. But we can be raised up to a newness of life. We can be changed into something greater. If we believe in Jesus, if we turn from the life that destroys, if we confess him as Lord, if we're born again in baptism, then we can have something greater. And if we hold to and remain faithful, if we're perfected, then we'll have something far greater. I don't know where you find yourself today. Maybe you're in the pit. Maybe you're looking up and wondering, is there any hope? Maybe you're the person that's put someone else there and you've done something wrong and you see that there needs to be a change. Maybe you're looking at your life wondering, why is all this happening? Maybe it's a time to hold closer to your God, to turn back to him, to turn to him. Because only in Jesus is hope found. Today, if you're subject to the invitation, today if you need to put on Christ, today if you need the prayers of your brothers and sisters, we honor and offer you a chance to let that need be known right now. Always sing this song of invitation.